All right. Well, good. I guess there's still a few people we can say good morning, right? And good afternoon. And for us out here in East Asia, almost good evening. So, welcome everyone. Thanks, Anirvan, for the really nice introduction. I'm John Hamalian. And this topic of, experimental thinking, I saw the synopsis from yesterday. I was in a little bit yesterday as well, and there was already a lot of comments around this topic without even mentioning it specifically. So people were talking about continuous learning, for example, restarting our thinking. There were mentions about collaboration and curiosity, and then even today we had the good Dr. Morphus mentioning things like cause and effect and other things as well. And then we just heard from Joachim gave that presentation talking about things like positive change, right, and breaking old habits. So to me, they all kind of go back to this very fundamental element, one of the essential mind skills for the digital age that as I call them, and that's experimental thinking. How can we, and this, my lean epiphany was back in the 1990s when I was very lucky, got a chance to work for an ex-Toyota manager. We thought he was kind of crazy at first, and then after a while we said, well, this guy knows what he's talking about. And one of the things, he never actually said experimental thinking, but years have passed and I've thought about it. And in a way, that was a big thing that he was actually teaching us, right? How do we always try out new things? How do we experiment, but also do those in a disciplined way, right? Rather than just sort of random tryouts. But yeah, how can we constantly have that mindset, almost that growth mindset? And that's what we're going to talk about today. So let's start with kind of a basic question that I think is in a way starts us off pretty well, right? Just think about plans in general. I guess it could be life plans too, but let's just think about our business. Based on your business experience, what % of our plans go as planned? And here's a few options for you. I guess you can type this in the chat box. If you say number one, I need to meet you, figure out what you're doing. And I don't know, maybe not too many people down at number 5, I hope. All right, so Arnivan's at 4, less than half. Yeah. Omar is saying 25%. Yes, less than 50, right? Chris saying, 30. Let's say 30% go as well. Yeah, probably less than 50, somewhere around there, right? Who knows what the number is? And in any case, it's a number we would love to get higher, right? We would love to have that number higher. But yeah, we do have failures. And, even if you look at, here's another one for number 4, yep, less than half. Well, everyone pretty much knows about the Great Pyramid of Egypt. We've got at least one person in the conference from Egypt, actually. That's pretty popular. Not a lot of people know this other one. Not too far from the Great Pyramid. It's called the Bent Pyramid. Why? Because it's bent. It was, they didn't know how to get the sides smooth. Just didn't know how to do it. It was a failure, right? Of course, eventually they persisted. So, this kind of brings us back to some fundamentals, and in the way that we think about, for example, planning, right? And I think we all kind of grew up in this sort of a way of thinking about planning through anything, even really in our personal lives, right? We come up with a plan. Of course, it's a great plan, right? We have a lot of smart people, maybe in front of a whiteboard somewhere. We come up with this great plan, and then what do? Well, we of course we start executing that plan, right? And then we conduct perhaps a series of reviews for conformance to that plan. That's the way we kind of grew up, right? At least that's the way I grew up. Is that sort of a linear way of thinking about planning? There's probably at least one big assumption here. What do you think would be? Probably two big ones here, at least. What would be a big assumption entailed with this way of thinking? Get your thoughts on that. What do you think would be one major assumption, at least, related to this pattern of thinking? Uncertainties are assumed. Yeah, exactly, right? And it only works if the plan makes sense in the first place. It seems so obvious, right? But yet again, we don't necessarily incorporate that in the way we think through things, especially for plans. So yeah, we make some very big assumptions that the plan was right in the first place. And Arnivan's saying uncertainties are assumed. In a way, we're also saying that nothing changes along the way. Right? And last year and still this year with COVID, we've shown that things change a lot, especially more and more. So this way of thinking, it really just doesn't work too much anymore, unless you're in a very known, rigid environment. So sometimes we call that the audacity of certainty. I just saw this not long ago. This was actually my old company. So GM China was a very successful company, but this was one of their few missteps. They had a big plan to roll out these 3-cylinder engines, big splash, big marketing, big project, and it didn't work. Maybe people thought 3-cylinder engines are low quality, all kinds of reasons. But think back to that traditional planning approach. It seems like they were kind of going along that, right? Rigid, linear. That may have worked a few years ago in sort of the industrial age way of thinking. Not too much anymore. What if they had done more experimental thinking? Right, trying out, maybe talking to customers first, and then seeing where this might not have been the right plan in the first place. So sometimes I call these, the old relics of a surefire plan is one of them. And if you've ever read The Lean Startup, so that was really one of the key points from Eric Ries was that. And one of you really kind of mentioned this in the chat box too, right? So they were all, he was talking about a certain company on a certain launch of a new product. They were all green. They were showing green on everything. So they were flawlessly executing a plan that didn't make sense though, because the original assumptions were wrong. And that's why we need what I would call experimental thinking. And a lot of companies are acknowledging that this needs to be in place. A lot of tools out there, right? But the thinking behind it, and like Payush says, the DBS Bank, if you don't know, is one of the biggest, if not the biggest bank out here in Southeast Asia. I'm broadcasting from Singapore. So sort of developing that culture, and that goes back, in my mind, to the mindset, right? The way of thinking through things. And since we are talking OpEx in this conference, these three, and I don't have Six Sigma in here, but definitely I could have included Six Sigma. These, I think you could probably say, they would not exist the way they are now without experimental thinking, right? So this is a common foundation, a common bond between all of these types of methodologies and thinking processes. Is experimental thinking. So it's in my mind, it's one of the essentials. Let's start out with a little exercise. So this is a workshop. Someone reminded me once, workshop has two words. One is work and the other one is shop. And a shop is a place where we do work, right? So we ought to get to to maybe a little exercise here. By now, maybe a lot of people already know each other. We're going to go back into our table teams. If you don't know each other yet, I think we'll have a limit of 4. So, maybe get to know each other if you don't know each other already. And just brainstorm very briefly, but think of some new service, maybe something that hasn't been tested before. The easiest ones are like maybe a new restaurant, a new shopping experience, and perhaps like a new hotel, but probably experiential. So, for example, we're going to eat in and while sitting in a swimming pool as an experience. It's probably a terrible idea, right? But that could be a new type of a service. That's all you have to do is come up with the basic theme of a new concept, and that's it. Nothing really that much more detailed. Maybe you're going to think of an online hotel type of a thing, a virtual hotel, especially in these days. So yeah, let's do that for 15 minutes or so. See what you come up with, and then we're going to use your concept as a basis for the exercise that comes after this. All right, sound good? The ringleader, I would say, it was kind of you were the one that came up with the original idea. Do you want to share the idea you came up with, Omar? Also, we have Kati coming up. Great. Hi, Kati.
Hi. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, just to, I was with Anirban and Chris in the team. So then he just launched this idea of a Catalan restaurant in Northern Ireland. But we just develop a little bit more the idea just to also create a kind of an app just to pre-order the type of meals that we were requiring, especially because today there are a lot of specificities, and people that they cannot eat gluten or they are vegetarian. So this will help to plan and just manage the inventory in the restaurants and offer the good quality and the good taste to everybody. So it was kind of improve the customer experience end to end.
That sounds awesome. I got some good friends. Actually, we have an affiliate in the Lean Global Network in Barcelona, so I'm sure they would be delighted to hear your idea.
And we were just saying it's now lunchtime for us, so we were just starving, like the three of us just talking about food.
No wonder your concept was about dining. Well, thanks for sharing that, Kati.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Yeah, so that's pretty cool. And then Omar, I saw your message. Yeah, you can share yours as well. And there you are.
Hi, everybody. Our idea was to have an underwater restaurant that is really in the sea. And what we came up with after introducing ourselves was to have an old submarine that would be anchored to the location, so that we are taking care of the flora and the fauna around the site, so that we do not mess up with the environment there. And we thought of a few ideas. One of the ideas was of how to transport the people. So something like a tunnel that would transport the people, or like a capsule. We thought also of having planting vegetables inside the submarine and using technologies to get fresh water from the seawater and get energy from the seawater itself. In a nutshell, to make it a positive experience for everybody there. In addition to that, we thought of doing some fishing from around the submarine, and people will have the real experience with the submarine. So that was the idea in a nutshell, and we complemented one another when we had that idea. So the idea came up, and then we started building on it. We looked at the positives and the negatives of the idea. John, back to you.
All right, so Kati, I think you shared your screen. Is that okay?
John, back to you.
All right, Thank you very much, Omar. Yeah, and Devyani had participated well, and we made sure we were covering the whole sustainability, sort of element as well, and not harming anything underwater. But yeah, it was a pretty cool idea as well. Also, we must have been people hungry because that was also dining example. So nice work, right? So we came up with a few ideas. What comes next? Right. So in any plan, whether it's for a new product, a new service, a new process, or just a strategy, these things. And we can say, your new concept is quite nice, but there would almost always be some things that are not certain, right? My old Toyota boss would say, if there was nothing that was not certain, then your plan is not aggressive enough, right? You're not stretching enough. You're not innovative enough. So what do we do next, right? So, going back to the lean startup a little bit, this was a great learning experience for me. If you haven't read it, it was all about, it was about a lot of things, but a lot of it was experimenting. And his whole premise really was, when you're in an environment where things are changing a lot, the old ways don't work anymore. Whether that's a startup, an actual small company just starting up, or a startup within a larger company, even MNCs. So, and this was the thing that I think we know this, that he mentioned, and many of us may well do that when we do our planning, whether it's again or just for a project plan. But it's a good reminder, right? So that becomes one of the next steps. There's a few what I call the jumps to jeopardy. This helps us to avoid the first one, and I think a lot of people, some of you could probably guess, maybe this one. Jump to conclusions, right? Including probably jumping to to assumptions as part of that, and we all do it. I do it. So how do we have that sort of mental discipline to not jump to conclusions, to think about what are our assumptions, and then later we can do something about them? The first thing we have to do is identify them, get them out on the table, because otherwise we would get, and this was what Lean Startup was really all about, not getting too far down the line before you realize, ooh, this is not going to work, which from a lean context is the ultimate in waste, right? Wasted ideas, wasted products, services. And if you look at this picture, well, this wasn't too long ago. Everybody knows what this is. I guess maybe was now. I don't even know if they're still selling it. Yeah, I never really had one, but that was the iPod, in a way, the precursor to the iPhone, set the stage for the iPhone. Going back a little ways before that, maybe testing our age a little bit. I remember this pretty well. So that was just like it says there, right? That was the Sony Walkman. This was the way before the iPod. It was revolutionary, right? This was the first way we were free to actually be unbounded by staying at home and listening to music. We could listen to music and things on the go. Revolutionary idea at the time. And I don't know if you know this story, but going back to assumptions, what was a big assumption that the iPod did not need to test because the Walkman already proved it? And I will give you, there's probably a lot, but there was one that I'm thinking of, and I'll give you a hint. It has something to do with the gentleman in the picture and what he's doing. Can you guess what was a really big assumption, make or break assumption, that the iPod did not need to test because the Walkman already proved it by being out in the market and working and being successful? Well, it has something to do with those things on his head. All right, which we take for granted now. But remember back then, no one had headphones, right? There was no such thing as headphones. So the really big assumption, or sort of a hypothesis, right, was, would people actually wear these headphones? Because if they wouldn't wear them, then they wouldn't be using the Walkman, and that product would have never been out and successful, and then maybe the iPod would have never came, and maybe the iPhone would have never came. Right? Would they think that the headphone, it does look kind of weird, right? Now we take it for granted. But remember walking around with this big thing on our head. Would people think it looks geeky? I'm not going outside with one of those things on. Nobody knew it. So it was something that needed to be tested, because it would have literally made or break the product. And Omar really had the other big assumption as well that they had to test. Would they actually consume the music? Would they use it? Would they want to use it? Would be other assumption as well. So spot on, yeah. So it kind of illustrates, the need to do this. And again, I think we know this, of a new idea, a new plan. Again, it could be a product, a new service. It could just be a plan, a project plan. It could be a personal plan. So the first thing we do, of course, is actually identify those assumptions. And we're probably not going to have the patience or the time to identify all of them. But what are the key ones? So Omar mentioned one, I mentioned one for the Walkman and the iPod. What must be true for your plan to be realized, for your concept to be realized? And that's what we're going to do for your new concepts here shortly, is short list. What are your major assumptions? And then the other thing we can do then is prioritize them, because you may have, we won't do a lot of them, but in real life, you might have 25 or 50 or 100. How can we prioritize those assumptions so that we could then actually do something with them? And if you haven't seen this very, very simple tool called an assumptions map, some people call it an assumptions matrix, where you have, either it's something, an element of your plan that's either more known or less known, and important versus unimportant. Is it important to the success of your idea or your plan or not? So I'll give you a little example. You're opening up your dream was to open up that little cupcake shop. You come up with your assumptions, you put them on the Post-it notes, and you put them up on the matrix. And if it's kind of, not sure if you can see, but for example, the upper right, there's one that basically says, will people actually buy my cupcakes? Well, that's pretty important. If they're not going to buy your cupcakes, you will not have a shop, right? So they would go up on top, and then you really don't know that. So they would probably go more to the right, and you get to the upper right. All right, that's one of the orange ones. One of the pink ones, I'm not sure if you can see that, but on the lower right, so there's like, will they like chocolate or will they like strawberry? We may not know that, but they're not really that important. So we put them on the lower right, and then so on and so on. One of the ones on the lower left, it says students love cupcakes. Yeah, we're probably, that's a pretty good assumption that they do, right? So we put that over there. So a very simple tool, and in a way, it also reminds us that we need to think of our plans in terms of not a rigid plan, but an assumption that later we might need to do an experiment on. This reinforces our experimental thinking. Can anyone guess, so of the four quadrants, where would we probably maybe want to focus our efforts on maybe doing some experiments to test those assumptions later. Upper left, or maybe the upper right, lower left. Important, uncertain, yeah. Yep, IU, important, uncertain. So the upper right. Absolutely, yeah. And again, that maybe seem kind of obvious, right? But this helps us prioritize, especially when you have a lot of them. Could we do some on the lower right? Yeah, perhaps, right? There might be a few that you feel, really would like to test this out. Maybe even the upper left. Lower left, probably not. Don't waste the time, don't waste the energy. Does that make sense? So a nice, simple tool. Again, I use this in workshops. You can just put it up on the wall on a flip chart paper. And that's one of the first things you do after you come up with some sort of a plan, any plan really, is go through this process. So nice work. This is something that we can then, going off of your concept, we'll keep it pretty light, pretty simple. We'll go back to our tables, and based on those concepts that you came up with, what would be maybe some of just the really major ones, right? You can come up with as many as you want, but I would say maybe somewhere between 3 and 5, just for time's sake. And then where would you plot them on the map using those 4 quadrants we came up with? Does that sound good? And I've come up with a simple little Google Slides for us. So, super simple. The first one, and if anybody wants this, I guess you could just save it for your own use. Very basic. What you want people to, sometimes they'll jump right into the map and they'll try to figure out where things belong. And we always say, don't worry about the map yet. Just brainstorm your assumptions. One thing that helps that process, if you've ever heard of the 3 dimensions of innovation, so you have, one is desirability. If people actually want this could also be internal people as well. If you have a process change, will people buy into your change? Or it could be an external customer. Viability. I typed that right. Is it actually viable from a financial standpoint? And then, of course, the other one, feasibility. Is it technically feasible? Can you actually do it? You don't really have to think about those if you don't want, but it might help. Or in any case, some people organize their assumptions by those 3 elements. They even color code the Post-it notes by those 3. And it kind of helps you think and make sure, like, for example, if they're all on desirability, then that might mean that you haven't thought about another dimension. So it helps us to kind of balance out our thinking as we think through assumptions for anything. So you've got a spot on that page for coming up with your assumptions. And then I have a little map there on the second page. You can find your table team, so they're listed by number. And you can probably copy and paste, I guess, the Post-it notes onto this map and just see where you might plot those out. And so that's it. We'll just keep it pretty light. Again, based on the concept you came up with just before, how would you do that? You probably know, so Google, once you open up the link, so here's the link. Up on top, you'll see an option, top middle, I think, open with Google Slides, and then you'll be in there. That sound good? Any questions or anything else on that? So depending on the time we have, this maybe the last exercise we do as a team. And we'll take, about another 15, 20 minutes on this one back in your table teams, okay? If anyone has anything, just type it in the chat box. We'll visit the tables, see how you're doing. And we should be ready for to go back into our exercises, okay? So we'll see you back in your tables. Enjoy the exercise. That was a nice exercise for. And I think at least for our table, we can share the work that we did up for Google Slides. Omar, you want to share that? Here comes Omar. All right.
Okay. Hello, everybody. So let me try to share. I cannot share because you're sharing, Joel. Can you give me the, yeah. I think now I can share. Sure.
Cool. Gives you a couple of options, so.
Yes. It's easy.
Great.
Yeah, I think you see our slide now.
Yeah, just coming up.
Okay. All right, so we came up, Devyani, myself, and Joan came up with a few assumptions, only 5 assumptions. First assumption was build it and they will come. And this is the idea that if you make something good, fancy, then people will come and it will market itself. So this is one of the big assumptions that are necessary for the idea to succeed. The other assumption is it needs to be safe and secure, since it's underwater. So there should be a lot of safety and security measures that are intact, so to protect the people who work, the people who come and leave. And the other assumption is that there should be easy transportation to and from the restaurant, whether it's the capsules or whether it is the tunnel that will transport the people. Of course, another assumption is technology exists to provide the energy necessary to operate the restaurant, which is an old submarine. And of course, you cannot have nuclear energy in such a place. Skilled staff can be sourced, and these were only the 5 assumptions that we tested. So on the next slide, we looked at these, and the biggest and most important unknown is, I think, the build it and they will come could be a little bit more here to this side. It's important, and there is a high unknown in it. So this is one thing that needs to be studied and evaluated. The other one is technology exists to provide the energy. It's unknown. It is important, but of less importance. And transportation to and from the restaurant can be made. On the other side, on the assumptions map, skilled staff can be sourced. It is a known. It is important, but it's nothing to worry about. So not much to worry about, because you can find out staff who are who probably have worked in a water park and have restaurant experience, so they can work there. Security and safety is a known thing, and it has to be taken care of. So these basically were the assumptions that we worked on the assumption map. And having this assumption map is really good. In my humble opinion, we only worked with 5 assumptions, but I think there could be like 20 assumptions or more that we could test. And the unknown and are the ones to probably not look at, but to also have a mind when looking at these assumptions. John, back to you.
Thanks so much, Omar. And while I get my slides back up, yeah, I mean that's exactly what happens. So we had those 5, and in real life, right? So you got your battles, right? We're saying we need to experiment, but at some point we need to get things done. All right, so innovation, we diverge and then we converge. So this helps us to say, at some point we cannot experiment on everything. What are the most critical ones? And like Omar, you said, this helps us with that. So great. So just for time's sake, we'll move on and maybe cover the rest of this. I'll just kind of go through the rest pretty quick. As you might guess, the sort of the last thought on this is then, okay, now what do you do? Right. So great. We've used the assumptions map. We've sort of embracing experimental thinking. And just, kind of like going back to science class, right? What did we do? The scientists would always say, we don't have a plan. We have instead it was always that, I think I mentioned the word before. It was a scary word to me, that long word with an H. It's a hypothesis, right? And just like old science class probably, right? When we had an hypothesis, what did we do? We ran an experiment. So be a scientist. This is the head of Gojek, one of the biggest ride-hailing companies out here in Southeast Asia. That scientific thinking, almost like going back to what we grew up with in science class, is not knowing and assuming, right? But actually experimenting, going back to being a scientist. And this gentleman said, the time you could have spent arguing about something, you could have better spent the time actually going out and testing it. Let's try it out. So let's test hypotheses through experiment. I showed you the pyramid, the Great Pyramid of Egypt, and then the one that failed along the way. Even before that, this also exists a few kilometers away. This was an earlier one, the stepped pyramid, because they didn't know how to make the sides smooth at that point. So from this pyramid to this, decades, if not centuries, of experiments. Experiment after experiment, getting better and learning. So we learn by, we know this, right? Learn by doing and failing. Jackie Chan, in addition to being an actor, is also an environmentalist. So he comes up with prototypes of recycling mobile equipment, for example. This is what he's saying. To do learn. That's the scientific thinking. That's the mental thinking. And of course, we're going to fail along the way, but that's part of the experience. So the other jump to Jeopardy that I wanted to share with you, and really this whole process is designed, one, we mentioned not jumping to conclusions. We know that, right? But we do it sometimes. And then the other one, of course, that we also know, I think, is not jumping to solutions, right? How do we hold back and say, let's try out, right? Let's experiment. And along the way, let's do that as cheap as possible. What I used to learn from my mentors was fast and frugal. Right? How can we do a quick and cheap experiment? Let's learn, but let's learn quick. We don't have the time and money to do this forever. And then, kind of an example. I don't know if you guys ever saw the movie The Founder. I didn't see the whole movie. On the McDonald's, and one part of the movie was this clip where they realized that fast food wasn't fast enough. It was like over half an hour to make, I think, a burger and fries. Can you imagine that now? So to completely rethink and redesign their whole process. How did they do that? Well, they didn't just buy a bunch of equipment and hope that it was going to work. They actually went out to a tennis court. You can see it here, and just with chalk, did some experimentation, try this, try that. If it didn't work, try something else. And if you probably Google, the founder Discord or something like that, you'll see the clip, and it's just really, really, we can't play it that easy, I think, now, but worth watching. All right, so the last part, we'll just kind of cover this really briefly, and definitely the Six Sigma folks, and for sure know, this is designed for experiments. It's something that's a whole discipline. But to keep it kind of light, one of the examples goes back to the Lean Startup, and he had this very simple model that he said, as you go through your assumptions. Oh, thanks, Simeon. Yeah, well worth watching, I think, and use it in your training. For example, I use that in my training, that clip, to show what we're talking about here as part of the experimental mindset. So this is what Eric Ries said. It said, as your assumptions, go ahead and make a simple prototype, fast and frugal, just like we said, right? And then measure your results. What was the output of that experiment? And then, of course, what did you learn from it? And we mentioned that before, continuous learning. This is all about the learning process. And then he says, maybe you pivot and you persevere. But this is how we think through. Then what do you do with your assumptions, right? But interestingly enough, what Eric said in the book, he said when you design your experiment, you actually do this in reverse. So he said, design your experiment. The first step is this one. What do you want to learn? You do that first. And then the next question is, how would you measure that? And then you say, how would I build a simple experiment? All right, so that's how you actually design an experiment. During a stand-up table, I wanted to do a stand-up, so I didn't know the height, so I did this very simple, kind of a prototype. Once I got the height right, I bought a cheap table, and I experimented with that for a while, and then maybe I'll buy a little nicer table. But that's part of my mental mindset. So final thoughts, all basically an experiment. Keep trying things. Use the experiment thinking. And I thought about this before as well. And is there anything in your life, either career or even personal life, that maybe you wish you would have taken a less rigid and knowing everything approach and actually using the experimental? I know there's a few things in my life I said, I really wish I maybe did more experimental way of approaching that problem. And, thanks a lot for all your hard work during the exercises, and hopefully this helps us all, including myself, to keep developing that experimental mindset that's so important for change and innovation. Thank you very much. Hi, Arnie Vaughn.
Hey, John, for that, and great learning exercise. There was an echo here. So we were, as usual, your experiments or your workshops have that, makes you think, and that's important. So thanks for doing it again with our audience, and I'm sure the guys in the audience also loved it. I already see some feedback coming in, so which is really good. So with that, I would like to thank you.
Thank you, Arnie Vaughn.
Cool. And that was desirability, viability, and feasibility of doing a workshop with just a handful of resources. It was presented by John. Now, moving on to the next session. So we had initially planned kind of a networking session. What we'll do is instead, because we'll have we'll have the last session of the day, which is the Roundtable Insights discussion. That's going to take place at 1:30. And we roughly have about 20 minutes, and some of the people just want to take a break, as they mentioned. So we will keep the lounge open. So if anybody wants to network with anybody, have a chat. I'm sure John will be around, or any of the others. Let's take a table. Let's have a sort of a homely chat here, and then we will regroup again at 1:30 for our last part of the event. And once again, thank you, John.
Thanks.